Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. A little not safe for work. Let's do it. What's the most effed up drama that you've seen from a place where you've lived? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A guy convinced every single family member of his, including the kids and the elderly, that he was possessed by their dead patriarch. The entire family was found dead, hanging from the ceiling like the aerial roots of a tree, an act they all willingly participated in as some sort of ritual. Netflix has a detailed documentary on the event, and it's a whole lot scarier and creepier than what little I've written. Woman calls her mother at 3 a.m., tells her to come get the kids, hangs herself off banister. Her husband was found upstairs, hidden under a pile of blankets, stabbed a ridiculous number of times. Rumor has it, the guy was a special ed teacher, and the wife found out he had been molesting and SAing some of the students. I didn't see the accident, but while living in Jamaica, I saw a man carrying a mangled body just walking in the country. I later learned they were brothers and worked construction together. One brother fell from a great height, and the other brother was just carrying his body, walking towards the hospital, even though the brother had died on impact. He was just in a terrible, sad mania. The crows have taught themselves to bark exactly like my dog when she's being fierce. They fly over her head, barking loudly at her, which upsets her sister and the neighbor's dogs. Total chaos. An entire family got murdered, and their house burned down. Everyone thought it was the dad, but it turned out to be the uncle who was involved in a gang and did it as some part of initiation. This one spans decades. 1979. 4 aspiring thugs I went to high school with steal a mini bike, but are caught in the process by a 12-year-old boy, so they murder him. The star witness against them is a 5th student that the general scuttlebutt around the school said was just as involved as the other 4, but he testifies and is protected by the ADA at the time. This basically makes the assistant DA's career. He later goes on to become the district attorney. He mentors the star witness and pulls some strings to get the kid onto the police force. The star witness, with plenty of support from the DA, goes on to become the chief of police. A junkie breaks into the chief's car and steals a bag holding the chief's weapon, porn, and sex toys. He gets caught. The chief has him chained to the floor of a holding cell and beats the hell out of him. The junkie story makes it to the press. The chief is investigated. The DA obstructs justice on the chief's behalf, and they both go down in flames. The chief is accused of assaulting a suspect in police custody, a subsequent cover-up, and a coercion of witnesses. He pleads guilty to lesser charges. He goes to prison. The DA is convicted of federal obstruction of justice charges in the investigation of the chief. He is convicted, fined $100,000, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. The chief is considered, for a time, not sure what his status is now, a suspect of the Long Island serial killer investigation. Are you talking about good old Chief Burke? As a Long Islander, I know a lot about this. And if he wasn't the Long Island serial killer, he definitely was a part of the cover-up, in my opinion. Guy from the next town over abducted and murdered a little girl. I was involved in the search when she went missing, but she never turned up. Bone fragments were eventually found in his fireplace. There was a fetish burglar who terrorized my hometown and broke into around 150 homes. My mom was terrified for years. Super creepy shit, like taking small personal items, stalking, eating food from fridges, laying out panties down the hall in a pattern, tearing up photos, etc. My house and my grandmother's were in his hunting zone. The cops downplayed it. He was caught 40 effing years later and is now known as the Golden State Killer. Our assistant pastor took in his 3 nieces after his brother died. One day, the town discovered that all 3 of them were suspiciously pregnant around the same time. A social worker called the police to investigate what was going on. Turned out, the pastor had been sleeping with his own flesh and blood. His wife knew about it and didn't report it. He was arrested and did a stint in prison. Upon release, he became a spiritual healer. He has since gone blind. My parents and I left the town before finding out what had become of the girls after the saga. 15-ish years ago, elementary school 2 streets away from me. My neighbor kid goes to that school. Their class goes on a field trip somewhere in the countryside. One girl complains about stomach pain. The teacher give her an over-the-counter painkiller and some water and hope for the best. All of a sudden, she collapses and starts to scream. Teachers call an ambulance, thinking her appendix is bursting or something. When the ambulance arrives, they quickly come to the conclusion that this 11-year-old girl is giving birth. She gives birth in the ambulance. All the parents get called to pick up their kids. The girl gets sent to the hospital and social services is called. One of the parents apparently leaked it to the local press, and that evening it was already on the national news. My mom heard it all from the neighbors when they picked up their kid. We felt horrible about it and thought that was that. Next day, several vans of TV news channels and newspapers park at the elementary school. If I walked to the end of my garden in my old house, I could see the parking area and the back of the school clearly. Those reporters all started to harass kids when the parents dropped them off at school. What do you think about this? Do you know she was pregnant? Who do you think the father is? The school called the cops. All the vans had to go off the school property, but they just moved them around the corner and waited till school was done and harassed the kids even more. Some fame-hungry parents and kids jumped in front of the camera. Several things got leaked to the press. The girl lived with her dad in a single-parent household with her slightly older half-brother. Their mom was nowhere to be found. She just dropped off the kids one day and went to the home country. The dad did lose custody over his much older daughter when she was still a minor due to SA accusations. This older daughter was the half-sister to the little girl. She was at least 25 when this happened and did not live with them, of course. A police officer confirmed on the national news that they were doing DNA testing, and the most likely suspect was her half-brother. Both her half-brother, who was still a minor, and her father were held in custody. Due to the siblings sharing obvious DNA and the baby also being related, they had to do some more advanced tests that took longer. Then, after a week or two, confirmation came that the father of the girl was also the father of the baby by the national news. The half-sister also confirmed in an interview that the dad was SA to her and that she knew he would also touch the little girl at some point. How and why he had the custody over the 2 kids, nobody knows. The public went feral. The house of this family was in my neighborhood, so I all saw and heard what happened. Windows got smashed, fireworks and smoke bombs thrown into the house. Graffiti was used to tag the house with pedo, among other things. The little girl was taken into custody by social services and adopted out to a family somewhere on the other side of the country, along with her daughter. They also got their names changed. The father was charged with a prison sentence. I do not know what happened to the half-brother. The whole time the press was swarming my neighborhood like mosquitoes, harassing all those little kids, and they tried to paint our neighborhood as some breeding ground for child moms and brides, which is far from the case, and the poor little girl not knowing what was going on and potentially suffering years of abuse. Well, that was a terrible roller coaster ride. It's crazy to think how someone like that could have custody of any child or anyone, or even be on the streets, but wow, terrible. Hopefully he got his comeuppance in prison. My small town New Year's Eve 1998, a bunch of grade 11 or 12 and some first-year college kids were having a party. The parents knew about it, but were out of town, so they asked one of the neighbors to check on the kids. They knew there would be alcohol. The neighbor went to check as asked, but whatever went down is still a bit murky. Apparently, there was a lot of cocaine involved. A fight broke out, and the neighbor was killed. A code of silence fell over every teenager in town. Even if you weren't at the party, you knew someone who was. Another neighbor, a sibling, your old babysitter, etc. We had endless assemblies at school about code of silence, and how it hurts more in the end. It took several years of undercover work from RCMP, but they did eventually get the guy responsible. We all knew who it was, but they needed solid evidence. It was a wild case, and it was the talk of the town for years. This didn't happen while I lived there, but it's a well-known and true story from the 90s. I went to a small private college in Michigan. The college had a good president in the 90s that took the school from party school that you really didn't send your daughter to to a legitimately prestigious academic institution. It came out in the late 90s that he was having an affair with his daughter-in-law, and not the oops, we got drunk kind. The affair lasted 17 years. After it came out, she was found dead with a bullet through her head in the school's arboretum. The local police contaminated the scene so badly it's impossible to know if it was a suicide or murder. They don't mention that on college tours. 2 or 3 high schoolers set up a drug deal where they'd supply the product. The person buying, also in high school, had about $20K on them. They end up robbing the kid, shoot him dead, digging a hole and lighting the remains on fire. They then go to the car dealer and pay cash for what I'm not sure what kind of car, Beamer maybe. They were caught, obviously. When I was about 10, a girl around my age, whom I had mutual friends with but never met, got murdered by her neighbor, who was a few years older. Apparently they grew up next to each other and played together all the time, so the parents never had any concern. The day she disappeared, they had been playing outside. The kid said he thought she went home and didn't see her. There was a major search all over the city for her. All parents were telling their kids to stay inside, since a lot of pedos live in our city and abduction was common, especially the area I grew up in. It was on the news every day and everyone was helping look for her. I remember being terrified to even just go in my backyard. A few days passed and the kid's mom smelled something in his room. She found the girl's body under his waterbed. His story was that he accidentally knocked her out when they were playing and got scared, so he decided to stab her to death. It was a major tragedy. He was sentenced to life. I think was supposed to get another trial this year or last, but there was a petition going around to not even open the case back up. It's not that effed up, but it's pretty crazy. When I was in sophomore in high school, there was a lady cop who actually went undercover in our school. I never once met or saw her personally, and apparently she got in with the burnouts and cool guys that sold or did drugs. One day they came to our school and arrested like 20 kids in the middle of class. One was arrested in my second period Spanish class. Cops showed up and asked for him and told him to go with them, and he walked up calmly and they pounced, throwing him against a wall and slapping cuffs on in front of a room full of about 25 to 30 students. One kid jumped out of a window trying to escape. Later turned out that the lady cop who was undercover like effed a few of the students or gave them oral or something. The details were pretty murky, ended up making the news, and most people had never even heard of our town beforehand. It was pretty wild. 3 teen girls underage were at a party. The parents were serving alcohol. Predictably, the girl driving them home drunk wrecked the car upside down into a creek. She survived, the others did not. They drowned. It was in the winter and cold, and it was pretty sad. The driver showed up at court wearing a t-shirt with an alcohol, I think it was vodka, advert. The judge did notice and was livid, I heard. I never heard how the lawsuit against the idiot parents supplying the booze went. I'm sure they lost everything and then some, and rightfully so. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't been at parties in my life where people underage were drinking. But if they are, you make sure that they're Ubers or they're driving with someone not drinking, preferably an adult or parent. It's a real slippery slope and it should be avoided. But if it can't, take proper precautions, because this is a preventable tragedy. In a nearby town, very rural area, an undersheriff shot and killed a man with a beanbag shotgun that is rumored to have been bought on eBay. He shot the guy as he was complying with orders and from less than 10 feet away. Later in the body cam footage, he's heard telling other officers not to tell anyone what happened. Even the coroner was shocked the beanbag did that much damage. The officer had no training with the beanbag rounds and was warned to test it prior to use, but used it anyway. His argument in the courtroom was that the beanbag was defective, and he didn't know how to use it, so he couldn't be blamed for the death. He was found not guilty. Our town has 3 cops. 2 of them were having an affair. They were doing it in the back of the squad car and managed to somehow lock themselves in with no clothes in reach. They were discovered the next morning by some kids on the way to school who called their parents, who then called the 3rd cop to come get the other cops out of the car. By the time the 3rd cop got there, a good portion of the town, including the spouses of the trapped cops, had gathered around to witness the hubbub. Here's the kicker, at least to me. Only the female cop that was involved was fired. Lady hit a man on a motorcycle. She was blacked out on Xanax. She drove her car home, parked it in the garage, and went to sleep. Around 12 noon, they found his body on a remote side street. He was projected to have died a few hours before finding him, which means he was alive after the accident and she left him. He had so many broken bones, it was a shorter list to tell you what he didn't break. Burns from the motorcycle, and his arms were like completely flat. He also had bruising in the shape of tire marks up his torso. When they arrested the woman that did it, they had reversed the car out of the garage. You could still see blood and bits of flesh. As she was being arrested, her kids came off the bus from school. It was honestly such a horrific story for everyone involved. Anyways, she eventually did go to prison and got out. She lived in the town for like 4 months before the spray painting and breaking windows got too much and moved. She was arrested for Xanax possession not too long ago. Horrible all the way around.